Most of the watch industry runs on one assumption. You won't compare costs and plunge into a pricey watch that wouldn't give you value for your money. You see, for many watches, you get charged for marble showrooms, celebrity partnerships, and conglomerate overhead, and so-called craftsmanship. But there are 4 brands that break that sequence. These brands are actually worth your money. I'll tell you about these brands and the brutal reason every other brand isn't worth your money. Seiko. There's a man in Nagano right now building a movement on a bench where the tools are laid out in order, the same order they've been in for 40 years. He doesn't work for Rolex. He doesn't work for Omega. He works for Seiko, and the caliber he's assembling retails for somewhere between $200 and $300. That's not a budget watch. That's the bottom of a movement ecosystem that goes all the way up to Grand Seiko's Spring Drive, one of the most technically unusual movements ever placed inside a wristwatch. The thing most buyers miss about Seiko is vertical integration. Seiko builds its own movements, designs its own dials, manufactures its own crystals, and produces its own hairsprings. Very few Swiss houses do all of that. Several brands that claim to be full manufacturers are quietly sourcing movements from ETA or Sellita. Seiko sources from Seiko at every single price point. So when you buy a Seiko Prospex SPB 317, you're getting a Seiko 8L35 movement assembled at Seiko's Shinshu Watch Studio in Nagano. It was made on site by people who have spent careers on this caliber. The movement runs at 28,800 vibrations per hour and achieves daily accuracy of +6 to -4 seconds. That sits within certified chronometer territory, from a brand that doesn't even chase COSC certification for most of its catalog because it doesn't need the marketing credibility. Which of these do you currently own? Seiko 5, Prospex, or Presage? Now, compare that to what's happening at the other end of the Swiss mid-tier. A Tissot PRX Powermatic 80 runs a Swatch Group ETA 2824 derivative. It's a solid movement, but when Tissot charges $1,000 for it and Seiko charges $1,200 for a fully in-house caliber with better accuracy specifications and a 70-hour power reserve, it doesn't make sense. And Tissot isn't the worst offender. Tissot is at least honest about its positioning in the market. The worst offenders are the Swiss fashion brands charging $2,000 to $4,000 for a movement they bought from Sellita, dressed it in a case designed by a marketing department, and placed in a boutique on Rue du Rhône. Those brands aren't making watches, they're making packaging. The Seiko piece that no list explains properly, it's not just that Seiko is affordable for what it is. It's that Seiko developed the Spring Drive movement in 1997 after nearly 20 years of internal research, and what they built has no real equivalent anywhere at any price. The Spring Drive uses a mechanical mainspring with no battery and no electronic regulator. But instead of a traditional lever escapement, it uses a glide wheel controlled by a quartz crystal, breaking the mechanical energy electromagnetically to achieve accuracy of ±1 second per day. Grand Seiko's 2025 UFA Spring Drive variant tightens that to approximately 20 seconds per year. I keep coming back to this one. A $20,000 Swiss chronograph that needs servicing every 5 years is competing for accuracy with a Spring Drive that doesn't require a battery and beats it on precision by a factor of 3 or 4. That should be a much larger story in the watch world than it currently is. The reason it isn't is brand recognition. In the United States and Europe, Seiko still carries the baggage of its father's generation. The $7 quartz on a cracked leather strap. Grand Seiko, which became formally independent from Seiko in 2017, hasn't fully escaped that shadow despite finishing standards that rival anything Geneva produces. An independent comparison of case and dial finishing between a Grand Seiko Snowflake SBGA 211 and a Rolex Datejust puts them in roughly the same price band. The comparison consistently shows Grand Seiko holding its own or winning on surface quality under a loupe. Its stamped brass dial with silver-plated finish, hand-polished to evoke the snow-capped Hotaka Mountains surrounding the Shinshu Watch Studio, is the kind of dial object that collectors find under magnification and can't stop looking at. But the Datejust resells for 30% above retail. The Snowflake loses 20 to 30% on its first secondary market transaction. So Seiko has a resale problem. That's real and worth naming directly. Buy Seiko because you want to wear it, not because you want to flip it. a Watch You Seek thread from 2023 captures this tension clearly. A collector who'd owned 10 Grand Seikos over the years wrote this: "Any regular production model in the Grand Seiko catalog right now will lose 20 to 30% of MSRP on the secondary market, and the brand has instructed authorized dealers to give no discounts. Full retail for a watch that loses a third of its value immediately, because the brand identity isn't strong enough in the West to hold secondary prices the way Omega or Rolex do. That's a specific and honest failure. It doesn't change what the movement is, it changes what the purchase is as a financial decision." But here's the other side of that. What Seiko doesn't have is a value problem. At every tier from $100 to $20,000, Seiko gives you more movement per dollar than any Swiss conglomerate brand in the same window. Not marginally more, significantly more. Let me put a number on it. The Seiko Presage Sarx 043. A dress automatic with Zaratsu polished case surfaces and a dial finish that reviewers have compared to Grand Seiko at roughly $500. Runs the Seiko 6R35 movement with a 70-hour power reserve. The ETA 2824 derivative, powering many Swiss fashion watches at $1,500, achieves 42 hours. Same price bracket, completely different engineering priorities. Seiko chose movement. The Swiss fashion brands chose margin. And that's the whole argument. Anyone can buy a piece of Swiss marketing. Very few brands at any price are doing what Seiko does at Seiko's price points. There's also a practical element to Seiko ownership that rarely appears in buyer guides. Seiko's service network is among the most accessible in the watch industry. Parts availability for calibers going back 40 years is documented across the Watch You Seek and Desk Divers communities. A vintage Seiko 7S26 from the 90s can still be serviced by an independent watchmaker in most major cities. A 20-year-old Swiss fashion watch often can't. When you're buying a brand that manufactures its own components and has been doing so for over a century, you're buying something with an afterlife beyond your ownership. That matters more than most buyers factor in at the point of purchase. Seiko earns its place through engineering that no Swiss conglomerate at this price is matching. The next brand earns its place through something harder to fake, a certification from an independent government body that tests every single watch before it ships. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part, Omega. Let me tell you about what Omega costs right now. The Seamaster Diver, 300M in steel, the James Bond watch most people picture when they think of the brand, currently retails for around $6,500. The Speedmaster Moonwatch Professional is around $8,300 in its current caliber, 3,861 configuration. Both of those numbers are real money. So, the question is, what you're actually getting, and whether it justifies the price against a brand like IWC, which charges $9,000 for a pilot's chronograph built around a sourced movement, or Breitling, which is charging similar figures while navigating a prolonged identity reset that began when CVC Capital Partners bought it in 2017 and has not fully resolved. What Omega is selling that neither IWC nor Breitling can match: the Master Chronometer certification from Metis. This isn't Omega's internal quality rating. It's the Swiss Federal Institute of Metrology, an independent government body running the watch through 8 tests over 10 days. The watch goes into a 15,000 Gauss magnetic field. It gets accuracy checked before and after full magnetization. It gets tested at varying power reserve levels. It gets its water resistance verified by full immersion under pressure, not just pressure simulation. The final accuracy result must land within 0 to plus 5 seconds per day across all of those conditions. That standard is tighter than COSC, and COSC doesn't test the whole watch. It tests only the bare movement, without the case around it. Metis tests the entire assembled watch. That's the detail no Omega marketing brochure explains clearly enough, and it matters in daily life in a specific way. Your smartphone generates a magnetic field of somewhere between 1 and 5 Gauss. an MRI machine hits 15,000 Gauss. The Omega Seamaster will function accurately, leaving an MRI room. Most of its price tier competitors won't. IWC's movements are COSC certified. So are Breitling's Navitimers in their B1 versions. COSC certification means +4 to -6 seconds per day on the bare movement. It says nothing about what happens when the movement is cased, magnetized, worn for 18 hours, or stressed through temperature changes. Omega's certification covers all of that and puts a government seal on the result. And Omega is charging less than IWC for a more thoroughly tested product. That's not brand loyalty, that's math. Now, Omega isn't innocent. The Swatch Group relationship means Omega shares infrastructure and management overhead with Longines, Tissot, Hamilton, Mido, and Rado. The marketing budget is large enough to put the brand on the wrists of actors, astronauts, and athletes simultaneously. And Omega has made some questionable pricing calls in the last decade. The DeVille Trésor has drifted upward into territory where the value argument becomes strained. Certain planet-ocean configurations are technically difficult to justify at their current prices. But the core catalog holds: the Seamaster 300M, the Speedmaster Professional, the Aquaterra in its 38mm form. These aren't fashion purchases. They're mission-defined watches with documented military and scientific deployment records backed by a certification standard that no mid-tier Swiss competitor has implemented. One more thing the Moonwatch does that its price doesn't fully account for. It is one of the most documented objects in human history. NASA qualification records from 1965 exist in public archives. The exact references worn on each Apollo mission are cataloged by reference number and by mission. The technical lineage from caliber 321 through 861, 1,861, and 3,861 is an unbroken development chain, traceable in published Omega records and independent horological research. When you buy a Speedmaster, you buy something with a paper trail running back 60 years, sourced from NASA documents and Omega's published archival records. That's not nostalgia. That's provenance. Provenance at $8,300 is underpriced compared to a pilot's watch with marketing heritage and no operational one. There's a technical layer underneath the Metis conversation that rarely gets explained to buyers. Omega's coaxial escapement, introduced by watchmaker George Daniels and acquired by Omega in 1999, reduces friction between the escapement's components by using a 3-level exit action rather than the traditional sliding contact of a lever escapement. The practical result: coaxial movements require less lubrication, and the lubricant they do use degrades more slowly. Omega's service interval for coaxial movements is 10 years. The industry standard for conventional lever escapement movements is 5 years. At a service cost of several $100s per visit, that difference adds up quickly over a watch's lifetime. A 10-year service interval versus a 5-year interval saves you 1 or 2 full services over a decade of ownership. That's real money on top of the certified accuracy. And it's not a benefit that shows up in the marketing. There's a specific 2026 data point that reinforces the argument further. According to Watch Charts' January 2026 market report, Omega held its retail pricing steady, while IWC applied US-specific increases that didn't match other major markets. Omega and Cartier did not adjust prices in the October 2025 to January 2026 window, a period when gold gained more than 20% since October 2025. Holding prices through a 20% gold rally is a deliberate choice. Omega made it. IWC charged American customers for the gold rally and didn't apply the same logic in London or Hong Kong. So, when someone argues Omega is overpriced at $6,500 for the Seamaster 300M, the response is, compared to what, exactly? Compared to an IWC Pilots at $9,000 with a sourced movement and no independent certification? Compared to a Breitling Navitimer at a similar price, while the brand works out what it wants to be? Omega is not the cheapest option. It is the most defensible option at its price tier. Those are different claims, and the second one is worth making plainly. Omega justifies every dollar through 8 government-administered tests. The next brand takes a completely different approach. It eliminates the costs you should never have been paying in the first place. Nomos Glashütte. In 1990, a small group of watchmakers in the town of Glashütte, in the Saxon region of eastern Germany, started a company in a building that had been empty since the Iron Curtain came down. The town has been synonymous with precision watchmaking since the mid-19th century. Lang & Söhne is there. Glashütte Original is there. Both of those brands sell at $20,000 and above. Nomos looked at that same tradition, those same hand-finishing techniques, that same geographic identity, and 200 years of documented manufacturing history, and decided to build something people could actually afford. That decision has a specific dollar amount attached to it in 2026. A Nomos Tangente with the in-house Alpha caliber, a Bauhaus minimalist dial, and a sapphire caseback currently sits at roughly $2,000 to $2,200. The Alpha movement is hand-wound, runs at 21,600 vibrations per hour, and achieves daily accuracy of plus or minus 60 seconds without Nomos making any particular noise about it in their marketing. It's a legitimate mechanical dress watch for the price of an entry-level Tag Heuer Aquariser. The Tag Heuer at that price doesn't have an in-house movement. Let me be specific. Tag Heuer's Formula 1 Caliber 5, currently around $2,000, runs a Sellita SW200 derivative. Nomos's Tangente, at the same price, runs a movement Nomos designed and manufactures in Glashütte. Same money, completely different engineering stories. One is funding its own research and development. The other is funding Formula 1 sponsorships. The step up to Nomos's Neomatic line brings the DUW 3001, an in-house automatic with a date function. The Tangente Neomatic 41, currently around $3,400, is 11 millimeters thin and fits inside a watch case 12 millimeters deep. That's difficult engineering. Audemars Piguet makes thin movements. Piaget makes thin movements. Neither one charges $3,400 for one. The Club Campus 38, Nomos's entry point, runs the hand-wound DUW 4001 with a 43-hour power reserve and a California dial that reads as both casual and considered. Recent March 2026 releases in all olive and full rose added 2 new dial colorways aimed at graduation and first job buyers. These are not prestige objects. They're honest mechanical watches built for the person who did the reading rather than the person who recognized the logo. But the broader point is this. Nomos is interesting as a value argument in 2026, specifically because the post-2021 market correction is reshaping what buyers in the $2,000 to $5,000 window will pay for. A Watch Forum post from April 2026, authored by a contributor with a luxury retail analytics background, described it as a structural reset in how luxury is valued by the correction-era market. The same forum thread contains a quote that has circulated across collector forums since. Brands like Nomos are winning in this environment because they offer specs for dollar, transparency in sourcing. And finishing that actually stands up to a loop. The phrase was, "Respect the enthusiast's intelligence." That's precisely what Nomos does by spending on movements instead of marble floors and boutique leases. So why doesn't everyone already know Nomos? A few reasons, and they're worth being direct about. They have no flagship ambassador, no boutique on Fifth Avenue. The visual language is Bauhaus minimalism. Clean dials, typography that looks like a Swiss poster from 1962, no date window on many of their most important models. This divides opinion hard. The buyers who love it with the intensity of people who feel like they found something nobody else found. The buyers who want presence on the wrist walk straight past it. And there's a German versus Swiss credibility gap that has never fully closed. Swiss-made carries decades of marketing investment. Made in Glashütte means the same thing to anyone who's read the manufacturing history of the town, but that's a smaller group, and Nomos doesn't spend money expanding it. They spend money on movements. The honest limitation. Nomos doesn't hold secondary market value the way Swiss luxury sports watches do. A near-mint Nomos Club Campus, with box and papers, currently trades on watch charts around $999 against a retail closer to $1,400. A Tangente Neomatic in excellent condition moves for roughly $2,200 against a retail of $3,400. You're buying this to wear it, not to trade it. If your calculation is watches as assets, things that hold value against Swiss franc movements and gold price swings, then Nomos isn't the right answer. But if your calculation is the best possible mechanical watch for $2,000 to $4,000, built by people who design their own movements in a town with 200 years of documented watchmaking tradition, Nomos is the answer. And virtually every competitor at that price is charging you for things that have nothing to do with the watch on your wrist. One bracket worth mentioning alongside Nomos, Christopher Ward, a direct-to-consumer British brand, regularly sits in the same conversation for similar reasons. In-house movement development since 2014, a retail model that eliminates boutique markups by selling direct, and pricing that reflects engineering priorities over lifestyle positioning. The Christopher Ward C60 Trident Lumiere in titanium recently appeared in multiple Best Watches lists for March 2026, with inside hooks specifically highlighting its finishing quality and titanium case as punching above their price point. The C12 Bel Canto line, at roughly $3,500 to $4,000, offers an in-house developed chiming complication for a price that would barely cover the markup alone on an allocated Swiss sports watch. If Nomos's Bauhaus aesthetic doesn't work for you, Christopher Ward occupies the same value territory by a different route. Both brands are making the same fundamental bet. The engineering is the argument, the audience that responds to that argument is worth building for, and everything else is noise. Nomos and Christopher Ward are playing the long game. Tudor played a different game entirely. It built in-house movements while everyone assumed it was still borrowing from upstairs. Tudor. In 2012, Tudor launched the Black Bay. 41mm, a vintage-inspired diver design, bidirectional bezel, no date, a case shape borrowed from Rolex's own archive references. The watch world was politely interested. It looked like a Submariner reference from 1958, which was the intention, and it retailed at roughly $1,400, which was also the intention. What nobody predicted was what Tudor would do next. Instead of riding the heritage wave and coasting on Rolex adjacency, Tudor spent the following decade building an in-house movement program from scratch. The MT5602 caliber, launched in 2015, is COSC certified, achieves a power reserve of 70 hours, and produces daily accuracy within 0 and +4 seconds under real conditions. Tudor developed it independently. Rolex does not share movements with Tudor. That needs to be stated plainly, because a large share of buyers assume Tudor runs Rolex movements with marginally worse quality control. It doesn't. Tudor runs Tudor movements with Tudor quality control and a Tudor service network. The Black Bay 58 currently retails at around $3,800 depending on configuration. The current consensus across R, watches, R, Tudor, and the Swiss and Vintage 2026 Buyer's Guide places it as the single strongest value in mechanical watchmaking at this price point. Or close enough to it that the argument is about margins, not categories. Why does that matter in a world where Omega offers the Seamaster 300M at $6,500? Because $3,800 and $6,500 are different conversations. Someone entering mechanical watches for the first time, buying their first serious piece, is almost always shopping in the $3,000 to $5,000 window. Tudor owns that conversation better than anyone in the Swiss industry right now. But the part that gets buried under the heritage discussion and the inevitable Rolex comparison is this. Tudor's price discipline is intentional and documented. According to WatchChart's January 2026 market report, Tudor raised prices across the full catalog by 7.4% in January 2026. The rationale was rising gold and titanium costs. Gold had gained more than 20% since October 2025. For the steel catalog, where most buyers actually live, increases held under 5% for the year. Compare that to what IWC did in the same period. IWC raised prices in the US market specifically, a unilateral US-only increase that didn't match their pricing in other major markets. That's not cost management. That's testing how much American buyers will absorb before pushing back. Tudor tested the same question and came back with a conservative answer. There's also a secondary market story here that IWC doesn't have at this tier. A Black Bay 58 bought at retail holds relatively well. It won't appreciate like a Rolex GMT Master 2, and Tudor doesn't pretend it will. But watch exchange listings consistently show Black Bay 58s moving at $3,200 to $3,400 used, against a $3,800 retail. That's 10 to 15% depreciation. It sits below the floor on most Swiss mid-tier brands, several of which lose 30 to 40% of retail value on their first secondary market transaction. The thing nobody mentions in the Tudor conversation is the combination Tudor is pulling off simultaneously. It's one of the only brands at this tier that combines an independent in-house movement, a third-party accuracy certification from COSC, and price discipline in steel that keeps it under $4,000. Breitling does the first two at significantly higher price points. Omega does the first two at significantly higher price points. Tudor does all three at the exact price where first-time serious buyers shop. That's not an accident. That's the result of a decade of deliberate movement development, and it's the reason Tudor belongs on this list rather than on the list of brands charging you for things that aren't the watch. So when someone says Tudor is just a poor man's Rolex, the response is, go price a Breitling Super Ocean 42, go price an IWC Aqua Timer, go price an Omega Seamaster 300 inches, the same size range. Then come back and identify which one gives you a COSC certified in-house movement, a 70-hour power reserve, and a secondary market that doesn't immediately eat a third of your purchase price. Tudor isn't a budget play, it's a precision play. And in 2026, at the tier where most buyers actually spend their money, precision is exactly what's underpriced. Let me close the Tudor section with a moment that doesn't get discussed enough. In 2025, Tudor introduced the Pelagos 25407N with the MT5400 movement, COSC certified and offering a 70-hour power reserve in a Grade 2 titanium case on a titanium bracelet. Fratello Watches covered it as one of the most technically credible dive watches in its price range, and the Watch Chart's bestseller list for the US market in 2025 placed the Pelagos in the top-performing Tudor references by secondary market demand. A Grade 2 titanium case means lower density than steel, which translates to a watch that sits lighter on the wrist despite a 42mm case. Collectors who find the Black Bay 58 slightly too conservative visually and want something more overtly technical have the Pelagos. Buyers who want a smaller dress-adjacent diver have the Black Bay 58 or the Black Bay 54, a 37mm model that launched in 2024. Tudor has, without announcing it as a strategy, built a catalog that covers more of the watch-buying decision tree than most brands twice its price. Tudor keeps its price below where the brand could probably charge. That's either discipline or a long-term play. Either way, you benefit. That's the long game Tudor has been playing since 2012, not Rolex adjacency, an independent catalog built on movement credibility, price discipline, and a secondary market that actually behaves. And in a period where gold is up 20%, IWC is testing American buyers, and the mid-tier Swiss industry is struggling to hold its customer base. Tudor is sitting exactly where you'd want a brand to be, making something honest at a price the math supports. So, the brands you didn't see on this list aren't here because they make bad watches. Some of them make very good watches. They're not here because the price they charge doesn't come from the movement. It comes from the building the watch lived in before you bought it, the celebrity whose face was in the campaign, the conglomerate's quarterly margin targets, the boutique on Bond Street that needs to generate enough revenue per square foot to justify its lease renewal. None of that ends up on your wrist. None of it makes the watch run better. All of it comes out of your account. There's a cleaner way to say what this video has been arguing. The brands that earn your money in 2026 are the brands where the price is connected to the object, where the certification is real, where the movement was designed by the people who signed their name to the brand, where the secondary market tells you that buyers, not marketing, are setting the value. Seiko because the engineering has always been the entire point. Omega because an independent government body confirms it with 8 tests over 10 days. Nomos because they'd rather spend on movements than marble floors and boutique staff. Tudor because price discipline in steel is a deliberate choice, and they keep making it. Think about the person who walks into a boutique with $6,000 and no prior watch knowledge. They're going to be shown whatever the sales team has been incentivized to move, whatever the brand spent its ad budget pushing, whatever has the cleanest display case and the most expensive packaging. The watch inside that packaging might be great. It also might be a licensed movement inside a very expensive box with a name on the dial that marketing spent 40 years making sound important. The 4 brands on this list don't need that conversation. The numbers speak for themselves if you know what to ask. And now you know what to ask. Everything else is a conversation about something other than the watch. The watch industry has been telling you a story about what luxury costs. Some of it is true. Good movements are expensive to design, expensive to certify, expensive to manufacture at scale. But a large portion of the price you pay at the mid-tier Swiss brands isn't buying you any of that. It's buying you the infrastructure of a story. And the story isn't on your wrist. If you want a buying guide that breaks this down model by model, specific references, what to buy at each budget window, and what the secondary market actually tells you about long-term value, it's in the pinned comment. Use it before you spend $5,000 getting it wrong.